Chapter 3 of Tractate Yevamos further discusses the laws of the Levirate marriage. The Mishnah says, if there were 4 brothers, 2 of which were married to 2 sisters, and they both died childless, they should do chalitza to the other brothers and cannot do yibum. If they did marry, they must divorce. Some say it's actually a dispute if they need to divorce or not. If one of the sisters was forbidden to one of the other brothers as they were related, he can't marry her, but he can do yibum with her sister, and the other brother can't marry either of them. If the sister was prohibited to the other because of a mitzvah or because of sanctity, they must do chalitza, but they cannot do yibum. If both sisters are each forbidden to one of the brothers as they're related, they're allowed to marry the other one. The Gemara tries to argue based on these cases the implication of the existence of a zika bond, a connection of a sort, between the widow and her brother-in-law, but we say no. The principal issue with this case as to why the yibum is forbidden is as you can't negate the obligation to do yibum from yourself, and if you marry one and the other brother dies, this will cause this issue. It doesn't mention a case of 3 brothers, as that's obvious that he's negating the obligation by marrying one of them, and we don't mention 5 brothers, as it's very unlikely that 2 brothers would die. A similar case, if there are 3 sisters that marry 3 brothers and all 3 brothers die and there's 2 brothers to do yibum with, one brother does chalitza with one brother does chalitza with the other, and they both do chalitza with the third. The logic of this is further explained, and some actually disagree, saying that one brother can do chalitza for all of them. According to this latter opinion, there are a few particular cases discussed as to what he holds like and why in regards to these laws. There's further discussion if the principle of zika applies, how, and where. This is further discussed, along with the necessity of all the cases brought in the Mishnah in regards to this principle. There's further qualification on these cases. New Mishnah. There were 3 brothers, 2 of which were married to 2 sisters, or to a woman and her daughter, or even granddaughter. If they became widows, they need chalitza, but they cannot do yibum. But others exempt them even from chalitza. If one of the widows couldn't marry the brother-in-law because they were related, he may do yibum with her sister. If she couldn't marry him because of a mitzvah or sanctity, they do chalitza and cannot do yibum. The Gemara explains the necessity for this repetition to clarify the opinion that says that they're exempt from even chalitza. Still, if there are 2 sisters where one can't marry the brother-in-law due to being related, according to this, the other sister can still do yibum. This is further discussed. New Mishnah. If there's 3 brothers, 2 of which are married to 2 sisters, and the third is unmarried, if the first brother dies childless and the third brother betroths his widow, and then the second brother dies childless, Beis Shammai says the third brother remains with his betrothal, and the second widow does neither yibum or chalitza as she's his wife's sister. Beis Hillel would hold that he must divorce his betrothal and do chalitza with both wives. The Gemara says that this is to dispute the opinion of a Rabbi Yehoshua, which is going to be discussed way later. There's further discussion on the opinions, how they hold betrothal affects which stage of marriage exactly, which is debated, and after a bit it's said to only affect the stage of erusin, the earlier stage of marriage, where you give a ring or a betrothal document, and this is further discussed. New Mishnah. If there were 3 brothers, 2 of which married 2 sisters, and the third married some other woman, the second brother died, so the third brother did yibum, marrying the second brother's wife, and then died, the first brother doesn't marry either of them, as they're his wife's sister and her co-wife. If the third brother only betrothed the second brother's wife before dying, the first brother does chalitza with his wife and doesn't do yibum. The Gemara clarifies, if the third brother didn't even betroth the second wife, the first brother could do yibum, implying that according to this opinion, the zika bond does not exist. New Mishnah. If it was the same situation as before, only the third brother, the one married to the unrelated woman, died first, the second brother did yibum to marry his widow, and then he died, the first brother cannot do yibum or chalitza, as they're his wife's sister and her co-wife. If the second brother betrothed the third brother's widow and then died, the first brother must do chalitza and cannot do yibum. The Gemara debates the necessity of this case, as it's very repetitive of the prior, so it's explained that originally this one was taught and then they switched the rulings on the prior one and decided to teach it first, but they decided to keep this one in here anyways. New Mishnah. If there are 3 brothers, 2 of which married 2 sisters, and the third brother was married to some other woman, and the second brother died childless, so the third brother did yibum and then married his wife, and then the first husband's wife died, and then the third brother died childless, the first brother cannot marry the sister of his dead wife, as she was forbidden to him at one point during this. The Gemara adds an opinion that based on a verse, if at the time a woman becomes a widow, she's unable to be with her brother-in-law, she can no longer do yibum with him forever. This is not redundant from our case, because it adds that she's still not permitted to do yibum if it became permissible during the actual first yibum situation. This is implied from other cases. New Mishnah. If there were 3 brothers, 2 of which were married to 2 sisters, and the third was married to some other woman, and the middle husband got divorced, and then the third brother died childless, and the second divorced brother does Yibum to marry the third brother's widow, and then he dies childless, this is the case that the co-wives are permitted to marry the remaining brothers. The Gemara clarifies the logic of this case. It's discussed further, and the different opinions argue, again, if this implies the existence of a Zika bond. New Mishnah. With all of the cases discussed in the first Mishnah of the Tractate, if they were done but within a questionable state of betrothal or divorce, their co-wives require chalitza and cannot do yibum. A questionable betrothal would be, for instance, if someone threw the betrothal document to her and it landed close by her, and questionable divorce is where the husband wrote the divorce document himself, but there's no witnesses. Or if there are witnesses, but there's no date on the document, or if there is a date, but there's only one witness. The Gemara says that the implication is that if you throw a divorce document near a woman, it's not questionable. Some say the logic is that prior to the questionable divorce, if the husband had died, she would have been allowed to marry anyone, so it doesn't make sense to prohibit her from a questionable event. This is unlike the betrothal, as that's a stringency. Others argue with that, saying that then this stringent, questionable betrothal will be able to override someone else's proper betrothal. This is argued further. We compare it to a case where a house collapses on someone and his brother's daughter, her co-wife, does chalitza and cannot do yibum, as we don't know who died first. So there's a few answers as to why this is different than divorce. Some say we're more lenient by divorce, as that's a bit more common. Some say because by divorce the woman is right there and you can clearly show she's not allowed to marry the other, along with her co-wife. It's discussed further at length. There's also discussion as to why there's differences between the divorce and the betrothal document. Only divorce documents require a date. According to some, it's to prevent the husband profiting off of her fruit after the divorce, and we need to know when the divorce exactly happened for that. Others say it's because you can also betroth someone with money, which you don't mark a date on, and most do that. And if it's to prevent adultery, it wouldn't help, because no matter who's holding onto the document, they could fake the numbers, either the wife to save herself, or the husband to protect his wife. New Mishnah. If there are 3 brothers who are married to 3 unrelated women, and the first brother dies childless, so the second betrothed his widow and then dies, so both of these women must do chalitza and cannot do yibum, as based on the verse, you cannot do yibum if you have 2 zika bonds to your brother-in-law. Others say he can do yibum with one, and do chalitza with the other. The Gemara discusses the verse which teaches this. Some add if the second brother who betrothed the widow divorced her before he died, then her co-wife, the second brother's original wife, can do yibum with the third brother. The divorced betrothed woman cannot, as she might be confused with a case where she's receiving an unspecified divorce document where she cannot do yibum after. Some say she is actually allowed to marry the third brother as she was properly divorced. New Mishnah. If 2 brothers marry 2 sisters and one brother dies and the other's wife dies, they cannot marry, as she was forbidden to him briefly during this period. The Gemara explains that this is pretty redundant. It's just that this was actually taught first. The earlier Mishnah was cited due to its unique ruling and was then put in first, and this was not removed. In the event that the brother-in-law cohabited with his brother's widow while his own wife, her sister, was still alive, there's debate as to what he violated. Some say just as he was with his brother's wife. Some say also that he was with his wife's sister. This is debated. It's argued further as to what prohibitions he violated, and this is practically relevant in regards to where he's going to be buried. There's further particular discussion as to what exactly these opinions hold, one of which does not have a more inclusive prohibition principle, and we give a few examples. The disputed points are further explained. They're explained further, and again, the practical difference as to what the violations were by the cases were in regards to where people are buried. New Mishnah. If 2 men betrothed 2 women, and at the time of entering the chuppah, they decided to cohabit with the other one's wife, they're both liable for the prohibition against cohabiting with a married woman. If they were brothers, they'd also be liable for cohabiting with your brother's wife. And if the wives were both sisters, they'd both additionally be liable for cohabiting with your wife's sister. And if the women were menstruating, making them ritually impure as a nida, you'd also violate the principle against cohabiting with a nida. Anyways, if this occurs, the women are separated from their husbands for 3 months to watch for pregnancy, and in regards to this principle, if, God forbid, a minor was cohabited with, she does not need to be concerned about watching for pregnancy over the next few months. Also, if they were the daughters of Kohanim, they'd be disqualified from eating teruma, which is basically produce tithes that can be eaten by Kohanim and their relatives. The Gemara clarifies that this exchange of wives was accidental, and it brings supporting evidence. It debates who the view of this Mishnah is like according to what different people held like by these laws. There's further qualification by this case, such as that the wives have a concern of pregnancy as they cohabited twice, as the first act of cohabitation by a woman cannot make them pregnant, according to one opinion. That's actually disputed, citing many verses in regards to the incident with Tamar, but it's a debated point. There are other particularities mentioned in regards to how and women get pregnant. The remaining points are further discussed. It clarifies the point by the minor girl is an unusual case, hence the lack of an obligation for her to wait 3 months, and there's further disputed opinions in regards to who and in what circumstances does a woman who cohabited and then wants to marry need to wait 3 months after. It also said they cannot eat teruma if they were the daughters of Kohanim, and it says this means that if they're married to Yisraelim, they cannot eat teruma from their home. And that's the end of chapter 3.